The storm came down over the Yorkshire road on the last night of October in the year 1818 with no warning at all, not building slowly enough to be feared, but simply, suddenly, entirely present, the way disasters most often are. Cassandra Wren felt the coach lurch a half-second before she heard the crack of splitting wood, and then the world turned sideways, and there was mud and rain, and the terrible high scream of a frightened horse, and then nothing at all for what felt like a very long time. If you're new here, welcome to Timeless Love, where we bring you the deepest, most emotional romance stories every single week. Please subscribe right now, because what happens tonight on this storm-lashed road is about to change 2 lives forever. When the world righted itself again, she was standing in the rain beside the overturned wreck of a private carriage, not her own humble hired gig, which stood, miraculously, still upright a few yards further down the flooded lane, but a much grander conveyance, its fine wheel shattered against a fallen tree, its lacquered door hanging open into the mud. Inside the wrecked carriage, half thrown from his seat, lay a man in a fine dark greatcoat, blood running from a gash above his temple, entirely insensible. There was no coachman to be found, thrown clear, perhaps, or fled for help, and no other soul on the black, storm-lashed road but Cassandra herself. She did not hesitate. She had nursed her own father through a decade of failing health before his death the previous spring, and her hands, though small, did not shake as she worked the unconscious stranger free of the wreckage and half-dragged, half-carried him the short distance to the coaching in whose single-lit window she could just make out through the driving rain. The innkeeper, roused from his bed, took one look at the fine cut of the stranger's coat and the signet ring indent still pale on his finger, the ring itself lost somewhere in the mud of the crash, and declared, in the tone of a man both impressed and faintly frightened, that they had best send for a physician at first light, for this was plainly a gentleman of consequence, and consequence, in his long experience, did not take kindly to being neglected. There was no physician to be had before dawn. There was only Cassandra, a basin of water, clean linen torn from her own single spare petticoat, and a night that stretched on long past midnight while she tended the strangers wound by candlelight and waited, with a steadiness she did not entirely feel, to see whether he would wake at all. He woke a little past 3 in the morning, disoriented, his eyes struggling to focus in the low candlelight, his hand going instinctively to the bandage at his temple. "Where?" he managed, then stopped, wincing. "You were in a carriage accident, sir," Cassandra said gently. "Near a mile from this inn. I found you and brought you here. You have taken a blow to the head and lost a good deal of blood, but I believe the wound itself is not so deep as it first appeared." He looked at her for a long moment, a long, searching, entirely unguarded moment, the look of a man too concussed and too grateful to remember to be careful, and something in his grey eyes, even half-clouded with pain, struck her as unexpectedly gentle. "You saved my life," he said. "I have nothing to offer you for it. I do not even—" He stopped, frowning, patting at his own coat as though searching for something. "I do not seem to have my ring, nor, I think, my full wits. Forgive me. I am—" He hesitated, and something flickered across his face that she would only understand much later. "I am Nathaniel Ashcombe." It was not, in fact, his own name. It was his elder brother's, dead some 3 years now, though Cassandra could not have known that, and would not learn the whole truth of it for a very long time yet. "Cassandra Wren, sir," she said. "My father was the vicar of Hollowbeck, some years past, though he has since passed. I am travelling to my aunt's house in the north." "Cassandra," he repeated, as though testing the shape of it, and something in the way he said her name, slow, careful, as though it were a thing worth keeping, made her feel, absurdly, entirely seen, in a way she had not felt seen by anyone since her father's death. They talked, in fits and starts through the remaining hours of the night, of small things, of books, of the strange beauty of a storm seen from safety, of his half-remembered childhood dog and her own long-dead mother's roses. And by the time the grey dawn crept through the inn's narrow window, Cassandra Wren understood, with a particular clarity that comes only once or twice in a life, that she had spent one single night with a stranger and had somehow, impossibly, begun to fall in love with him. He left with the dawn, once the physician finally arrived and pronounced him fit to travel, his own household having been sent for in the small hours. He took her hand at the door, held it a moment longer than courtesy required, and said, "Lo, I do not know how a man thanks a woman for his own life, Miss Wren. I hope very much that our paths cross again." They did not cross again. Not for 6 months. Before we go on, if that goodbye at the inn door already has your heart aching, subscribe now, because the next twist is one you won't see coming. Cassandra thought of him, of Nathaniel, as she believed him named, more often than she would have liked to admit, in the 6 months that followed. She told herself it was foolish, that a single night's acquaintance with an injured stranger was no foundation for the persistent, quiet ache she carried, and yet the ache did not lessen with time, only settled, the way a stone settles at the bottom of a still pond. She was living, by then, in her aunt's small house in the north, her modest inheritance from her father sufficient to keep her in quiet, unremarkable comfort but nothing more, when the letter arrived that changed the whole shape of her expectations for the remainder of her life. It came from a solicitor's office in London, and it informed Miss Cassandra Wren, with the dry, formal language of legal men everywhere, that a marriage contract entered into by her late father and the late Duke of Ashcombe some 2 decades prior, at a time when the two men had been unlikely but genuine friends, before circumstance and distance had separated them, named her as the vicar's only surviving daughter, betrothed to the current holder of the title, the current Duke of Ashcombe. Cassandra read the letter 3 times before the full weight of it settled. Her father had never once mentioned such a contract in all the years of her girlhood. But the solicitor's letter was clear. The current Duke's own man of business had reviewed the contract's terms and found them binding, and the Duke himself had, apparently, agreed to honor it. She would travel to Ashcombe Park within the fortnight to meet, for the first time in her adult memory, the man she was contracted to marry. She arrived at Ashcombe Park on a cold, bright afternoon in April, her single modest trunk strapped to the roof of the hired carriage, her heart beating with an anxiety she could not fully name. She was shown into the grand entrance hall by a formal, impassive butler, and there, descending the wide staircase to greet her with careful, correct courtesy, was the Duke of Ashcombe himself. It was him, the stranger from the inn, the man she had nursed through a long, frightened night 6 months before, whose hand she had held, whose half-remembered dog and half-told childhood stories she had listened to until dawn. Her breath caught entirely. For one wild, hopeful second she thought, surely he would recognize her too, surely this impossible coincidence would break instantly into warmth. But the Duke's face, as he reached the bottom of the stair and bowed with cool, formal correctness, showed nothing at all. No flicker of recognition. No warmth. Only the polished, distant courtesy of a stranger greeting a stranger. "Miss Wren," he said, his voice as flat and correct as his bow had been. "Welcome to Ashcombe Park. I trust your journey was not too taxing." Cassandra felt something in her chest go very cold and very still. "It was tolerable, Your Grace," she managed. "Thank you." Right there, that cold greeting after everything they shared. If that hurt you as much as it hurt her, subscribe now, because there's a reason for his coldness, and it's not what you think. The days that followed only deepened Cassandra's confusion, and increasingly, her hurt. She was introduced, in her first week at Ashcombe, to the wider family and circle who came to inspect the new Duchess-to-be, among them a striking, sharp-eyed young woman named Lady Sophia Vane, a distant cousin of Gideon's late mother, who had, Cassandra gathered quickly from the careful, uneasy glances of the household staff, spent the better part of 2 years quietly positioning herself to become the next Duchess of Ashcombe herself, before an old, forgotten contract had arrived to append every careful plan she had laid. Sophia's manner toward Cassandra was, on its surface, entirely correct. Warm smiles, careful compliments, an elaborate show of welcome, but beneath the surface ran something colder, something Cassandra felt rather than could immediately name. "You are very fortunate, Miss Wren," Sophia said, on the second evening, over tea in the drawing-room, her voice light and pleasant and entirely without warmth beneath its pleasantness. "An old contract, honored after 20 years, delivering you a duke you have never even properly met. Some might almost call it fate. Others, I confess, might call it merely convenient timing, for a woman of such modest origins to find herself so suddenly and so thoroughly elevated." "I did not seek the contract, Lady Sophia," Cassandra said carefully. "It sought me." "I have no displeasure at all, Miss Wren," Sophia said, smiling. "I only observe that His Grace and I have known each other the whole of our lives. It is, perhaps, only natural for me to wonder what a complete stranger might truly offer him, that a lifetime's familiarity somehow could not." Cassandra said nothing further, but she understood, from that single exchange, that she had acquired an enemy every bit as dangerous as she was polished and patient. There were moments, in those early weeks, when Cassandra caught Gideon watching her across a room with an expression that did not match his careful words at all, a softness in his eyes, quickly masked. Once, at dinner, she mentioned, carefully testing, that she had once nursed a stranger through a carriage accident, watching his face as she said it. For one unguarded second something flickered there, something that might have been recognition, before he collected himself entirely and remarked, with careful blandness, that such accidents were unfortunately common on the northern roads in autumn, and changed the subject entirely. He knew. She became certain of it, slowly, over the following weeks. He knew precisely who she was, and he was choosing, deliberately, coldly, to pretend otherwise. She did not understand why, and the not understanding hurt far more than simple indifference ever could have. Subscribe now, because Sophia's cruelty is about to turn a great deal more dangerous. Sophia Vane did not confine her campaign to careful words alone. In the third week of Cassandra's residence at Ashcombe, small, precise cruelties began. A favorite shawl mysteriously misplaced the morning of an important family visit, a whispered remark, timed perfectly to reach Cassandra's ears, about how some women simply were not raised to know how a great house ought to be run. Gideon, absorbed in his own careful, guarded distance, seemed not to notice the growing campaign at all, which struck Cassandra as its own particular cruelty, that a man who had once held her hand at dawn and called her his savior could not now be troubled to notice his own cousin quietly working to make her feel unwelcome in what was meant to become her own home. It was the housekeeper, Mrs. Ferris, an old, steady woman who had served the Ashcombe family the better part of 40 years, and who had grown, over the weeks, quietly fond of the new young Duchess-to-be, who finally gave Cassandra some small clarity on the matter of her husband's strange, deliberate blindness. "You mustn't take His Grace's manner too much to heart, my lady," Mrs. Ferris said one evening, helping Cassandra with her hair before bed. "He is not a cold man by nature. I have known him since he was a boy, and I promise you, there was warmth in him once, and plenty of it. But he has learned, since his brother's death and his father's before that, to guard whatever he feels very close indeed." "Do you know," Cassandra asked carefully, whether his grace was ever involved in a carriage accident some 6 months past on the Yorkshire road? Mrs. Ferris's hands stilled in Cassandra's hair for one telling moment. "I could not say, my lady," she said, in a voice that made entirely clear she could, in fact, say a very great deal, and had simply decided, out of some old, careful loyalty, not to. The wedding, when it came, was a quiet, formal affair, conducted with all correct ceremony and none of the warmth Cassandra had, foolishly, once hoped a marriage might contain. Sophia Vane attended, seated prominently near the front, her expression composed into a mask of gracious goodwill that fooled, Cassandra suspected, absolutely no one who troubled to look closely enough. It was some 5 weeks into the marriage, weeks of correct, distant cohabitation, of separate chambers and careful conversation at dinner, that the first true crisis of Cassandra's new life arrived, and it arrived on the back of a half-broken chestnut mare that Sophia Vane had, with careful, smiling insistence, urged Cassandra to ride. "You must not spend the whole of your days indoors, Duchess," Sophia had said, 2 mornings before. "Bramble is a gentle creature, truly. I rode her myself only last week." Bramble did not settle. She had been ridden hard and deliberately unsettled that very morning, in fact, by a groom paid handsomely and quietly by Lady Sophia, though Cassandra would not learn this particular truth for some weeks yet. The mare bolted not a quarter-mile from the stables, tearing across the open parkland toward the old stone bridge that spanned the estate's narrow, swollen river, and Cassandra, thrown half from the saddle and clinging desperately to the reins, felt the whole world narrow to the terrifying rush of hooves and wind, and the fast-approaching stone parapet of a bridge her mount showed no sign whatsoever of slowing before. She heard, distantly, the sound of another horse closing the distance behind her at a dead gallop, and a voice, Gideon's voice, raw with a fear she had never once heard in him before, shouting her name across the open field. "Subscribe now, because you will not want to miss what happens on that bridge." He came alongside her not 10 yards from the stone parapet, leaning from his own saddle at a speed that should, by any reasonable measure, have unseated them both, and caught the mare's bridle in one hand, hauling back with every ounce of strength he possessed, his own horse's flanks scraping hard against brambles as the 2 animals fought together against the mare's terror. The bridge's stone edge came close enough that Cassandra could see, in one single frozen, terrible instant, the swollen brown water rushing beneath it, and then, with a final, wrenching effort, Gideon forced both horses to a shuddering, skidding halt not 3 feet from the parapet's edge. For a long moment neither of them moved at all. Then Gideon was off his own horse and pulling her down from brambles, shaking back into his arms, and Cassandra found herself weeping, shaking, held against his chest as he pressed his face into her hair and said, in a voice utterly stripped of all its careful, cold formality, "I thought I had lost you. God help me, Cassandra. I thought I had lost you before I ever found the courage to tell you the truth." "What truth?" Cassandra managed, through her own shaking breath. He pulled back just enough to look at her, and his eyes, for the very first time since her arrival at Ashcombe Park, held nothing guarded in them at all. "That I remembered you," he said, "from the very first moment you walked through my doors. That I have thought of you every single day of the 6 months between that stormy night and this one. That I have been a coward, these 5 weeks, hiding behind cold correctness because I did not know how to tell you the truth without shaming you for it. Right there, the confession she's been waiting weeks to hear. If you felt that, subscribe now, because it's not the end of the truth-telling, it's only the beginning." They walked the horses back slowly, side by side, in a silence that was, for the first time since her arrival, entirely without coldness in it, and it was there, in the quiet, shaken aftermath of the bridge, that Gideon finally told her everything, of his brother's name given in confused, frightened instinct at the inn, of his fear, arriving to find her at his own door 6 months later, that any acknowledgment of their true connection would ruin her reputation entirely, of his growing, agonized realization, watching her grow more distant and unhappy with each cold week, that his silence had only traded one wound for another far crueler one. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "I understand now that I was only protecting my own fear." Cassandra felt something in her chest that had been clenched tight for 5 long weeks finally, cautiously, begin to loosen, though she said, honestly, "You cannot undo 5 weeks of cold silence with a single confession beside a bridge, Gideon, however sincerely meant." "I do not ask it to vanish," he said. "I ask only for the chance to prove, in the weeks ahead, that the man who held you at dawn after that first accident is the same man standing before you now." It was in the days that followed the bridge that Cassandra began, quietly and carefully, to investigate the mare's strange, sudden temper, and it was Mrs. Ferris, again, who furnished the crucial piece she needed, having overheard, entirely by chance, one of the younger grooms boasting of a handsome tip he'd received for livening up a certain mare's morning exercise, at the particular request of Lady Sophia Vane. Cassandra brought the matter to Gideon directly, and watched something cold and furious settle over his face. "She might have killed you," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "for nothing more than her own wounded pride at a marriage that was never truly hers to claim. Subscribe now, because this confrontation has been a long time coming." He confronted his cousin that very evening, in the drawing-room, before the assembled household. "You arranged for my wife's mount to be deliberately unsettled," Gideon said, his voice carrying cold and clear across the room. "You are welcome at Ashcombe Park no longer. Whatever claim of family you once held here, you have forfeited it entirely by endangering my wife's very life over a wound to your own vanity." Sophia's composed mask cracked at last. "She is nothing," Sophia hissed. "A vicar's daughter, elevated by an old paper neither of you had any hand in signing, while I have known you the whole of my life." "She saved my life," Gideon said, "and asked nothing for it. You have spent 5 weeks trying to destroy hers, and asked for a great deal in return. I know which of you I judge the better woman, Sophia, and I think, in your own heart, you know it too." Sophia left Ashcombe Park within the week, her reputation quietly, carefully damaged by the whispered truth of what she had attempted. It was on a quiet evening some days after Sophia's departure that Mrs. Ferris, unprompted, told Cassandra a piece of her own long-buried history. "I was a lady's maid once, my lady, before I came to housekeeping," Mrs. Ferris said, folding linens by candlelight. "In my younger years, I loved a groom on my former mistress's estate. Loved him the way you love only once, if you're fortunate, in a whole life. He loved me the same. But he was a groom, and I was a lady's maid, and neither of us had a farthing between us, and my mistress made plain that if I did not end it, I would be turned off without a character. I ended it. I told myself it was sense, not cowardice. I have spent 40 years since wondering whether it was truly sense at all, or only fear wearing sense's clothing." She looked up, her old eyes steady on Cassandra's face. "I tell you this, my lady, because I watched His Grace almost lose you on that bridge, and I watched something in him break open that I have not seen in 20 years of service to this family. Do not let either of you talk yourselves out of what's plainly there between you, out of fear dressed up as caution." Cassandra took the old woman's weathered hand in both of hers. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't think I've been given plainer counsel in my whole life." It was only 4 days later that the second warning came, not the formal blackmail letter itself, which would not arrive for another week yet, but a folded note slipped under Cassandra's own chamber door sometime in the night, and signed, the handwriting cramped and unfamiliar. A woman who spends a night alone with a man not her husband is remembered longer than she is forgiven. Ask yourself what a common inn servants recall, and what price silence carries these days. A friend who wishes you had never come to Ashcombe at all. Cassandra read it twice with her heart hammering, then a third time, forcing her hands to stop shaking long enough to fold it away rather than burn it. She did not show it to Gideon that night. She lay awake long past midnight, the old fear creeping back in despite the fragile new warmth she and Gideon had only just begun to build, wondering whether the ghost of that single stormy night would ever truly stop reaching forward to threaten the life she was only just learning to want. The tentative warmth that grew between Cassandra and Gideon in the days following was fragile and slow, and entirely unlike the easy, instant intimacy of their single night at the inn. This was a warmth built more carefully, with more deliberate honesty. He moved the long formal dinner table for her, without being asked, replacing it with a smaller one close enough that a person might speak across it without raising their voice. He asked, each evening, what she had done with her day, and listened. But it was not to last undisturbed for long. Some 10 days after the anonymous note, a second letter arrived at Ashcombe Park, this one bolder, addressed directly to the Duke in a hand neither he nor Cassandra recognized. It was from a man named Josiah Crane, a footman who had, it transpired, been briefly employed at the very coaching inn where the accident had occurred, and who had observed rather more of that long night than either of them had ever supposed a servant might. He required, the letter stated with careful, poisonous politeness, a sum of £200 for his continued silence on the matter. "He means to ruin you," Gideon said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury, "or to bleed us both dry attempting not to be ruined. I will not have it, Cassandra." "What will you do?" Cassandra asked. "I do not yet know," Gideon admitted. "But I will not pay him." Crane, when refused the first sum, did not retreat quietly. He wrote a second letter within days, this one considerably less polite, naming a figure of £500 and a deadline of 1 week, and hinting, with unmistakable malice, that certain particulars of the scandalous encounter had already been shared, in careful confidence, with a gossiping acquaintance in London society. The confrontation, when it came, was not of Gideon's choosing at all, but was forced upon them both at a grand ball held some 10 days later at the London townhouse of Gideon's own formidable aunt, the Dowager Marchioness of Selby. Cassandra felt the danger before she fully understood its shape, a prickling unease as she noticed a familiar face among the Marchioness's serving staff, a face she recognized, with a sick lurch of her stomach, from the coaching in itself. She had no chance to warn Gideon before Crane made his move. It came during a lull in the dancing, in the crowded, glittering ballroom, when Crane approached the small circle around the Duke and Duchess with a tray of refreshments as pretext, and said, in a voice pitched just loud enough to carry to the nearest listening ears, "Your Grace, Your Grace, Duchess, how very pleasant to see you both again, after that dreadful night at the inn on the Yorkshire road. I do hope your Grace's head healed well, after the accident. And I do hope, my lady, that you have not caught a chill, from nursing his Grace through so long and, dare I say, so intimate a night, quite alone." The words landed in the crowded ballroom like a stone thrown into still water, ripples of curious, scandalized whispering spreading outward almost instantly. Gideon's face went very still. "You have made a grave error, Mr. Crane," Gideon said, his voice carrying with cold, cutting clarity. "You believed a threat whispered in a crowded ballroom would frighten me into silence. You were mistaken." He turned, deliberately, to address the whole curious, listening circle of the ballroom. 6 months ago, my carriage overturned in a storm on the Yorkshire road. I was thrown from the wreck, insensible, bleeding, entirely at the mercy of whatever stranger might happen upon me on that dark, empty lane. That stranger was Miss Cassandra Wren, as she then was, a vicar's daughter of unimpeachable character, who found me in the wreckage, carried me to shelter with her own 2 hands, and sat awake through the whole of that long, frightening night to nurse a wound that might otherwise have cost me my life. She asked nothing of me for it. I have since had the very great good fortune to discover that this same Miss Wren was, by an old contract signed by our 2 fathers 2 decades past, already destined to become my wife. I count that discovery among the finest strokes of fortune in my entire life. The silence that followed was, for one long, terrible moment, absolute. Then, from somewhere near the back of the ballroom, an elderly gentleman began, quite unexpectedly, to applaud, and the sound spread quickly through the crowded room, until the whole assembly stood clapping, and Josiah Crane, his scheme exposed, shrank back through the crowd and was gone from Ashcombe's affairs entirely within the week. Cassandra stood in the center of the applauding ballroom, tears standing openly in her eyes, and looked at her husband, and saw, at last, entirely unguarded and entirely present, the man she had somehow, impossibly, fallen in love with twice. "You did not have to say all of that," she said quietly, once they had made their way free of the crowd and out onto a quiet balcony overlooking the Marchioness's moonlit garden. "I have spent months protecting you through silence and cold distance, and it very nearly cost me the whole of what I love most in this world," Gideon said. "First on that bridge, and now here. I will not make that mistake again." "And what is it, precisely, that you feel?" Cassandra asked. "I love you," Gideon said simply. "I have loved you, I think, since the very first hour of that terrible night." "I love you too," she said. "I only needed you to be brave enough to say it plainly, rather than protect me into silence." He kissed her then, on the moonlit balcony, with the whole glittering ballroom and it scandalized, then delighted, gossip forgotten entirely behind them. The long gallery at Ashcombe Park held, now, a second portrait beside that of Gideon's smiling, long-dead brother Nathaniel, a portrait of Gideon and Cassandra together, commissioned on their second wedding anniversary, painted in a warmer, looser style Cassandra had specifically requested. A small daughter with her father's grey eyes and her mother's quiet steadiness played on the gallery floor beneath the 2 portraits some afternoons. The chestnut mare, Bramble, grazed sound and gentle in the near paddock still, ridden now only by Cassandra herself, at an easy, unhurried pace, with no one left at Ashcombe who wished her any harm. Mrs. Ferris lived to see the small daughter learn to walk the length of that same gallery, and told her once, in a private moment, that she had known the girl's parents would find their way to each other long before either of them had believed it themselves. "For I have seen fear mistaken for sense before, my lady, and I knew this time it would not win." Josiah Crane's letter, and the brief scandal it had threatened to produce, was remembered in Ashcombe society, in the years that followed, not as a mark against the Duchess's character at all, but as the very story that had proven it, the night London had watched a cold, careful Duke choose, openly and without hesitation, to defend the woman who had once saved his life. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.